Are you serious about planning a successful business exit? From Angel to Exit is your go-to resource. Subscribe to our newsletter at eckfeldt.com/podcast for even more valuable insights. And to get personalized guidance, take our free exit readiness assessment. It's just 24 questions, and it will give you a clear picture of your exit readiness. Find the assessment at eckfeldt.com/exit. Submit your results, and we'll schedule a free follow-up call to discuss your specific situation and the best way to maximize your valuation and ensure a successful transaction. Now, back to the episode. Welcome, everyone. This is From Angel to Exit. I'm Bruce Eckfeldt. I'm your host. Our guest today, Dan Bauer. He is very experienced in business and exits, helping founders navigate the process, helping look at opportunities. We're going to talk about strategy. We're going to talk about what you can do to prepare, things you should avoid, hopefully. But I'm excited this. Dan has got a lot of experience. I'm excited for this conversation. With
Thank
that,
you,
Dan.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, it's good to have you here. Before we dive into, exits and everything founders should be doing at this point, I'd love to hear your kind of personal story. How did you get into business? What's been your experience with exits? Give us a little background.
Sure. So I grew up in an entrepreneurial household. My parents owned and ran an HVAC, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning business out of our home. This was a part of everyday life. There were two telephone lines, and I always knew that the business one should not ring more than twice. And if it meant the personal one, you had to hang up on somebody to answer the business one. That's what we did.
Yeah.
And, it was a good, gritty business. And, from being recruited to help my dad carry air conditioners from the garage out to the truck was part of my life. But it was a lesson. It was a laboratory for business early on that, lessons I was able to call on later in life. And I wouldn't have traded it for anything. So That's the environment I grew up in. However, my passion was more about the corporate world. Mm-hmm. I was really drawn to the ad agency business as a teenager, fascinated by it. I was a media junkie and was just enthralled by the advertising agency business. My best friend's uncle ran an agency in Cleveland where I grew up, and I got a chance to go and see all these cool people wearing jeans and having fun, and I just said, that's what I'm going to do. So I studied advertising as an undergrad. I went to Ohio University in Athens, Ohio. Became a student there. I was not a big high school student, but I became a student in college because I found my passion studying advertising. And was lucky enough and determined enough to get a job in an ad agency right out of college. I joined an agency in Pittsburgh, my dream come true. I did that for 4 years. Then got a call one night from a mentor that said, "Hey, Dan, I've got a better job for you at a bigger agency." And it sounded great. I said, "Where is it?" I'm in Pittsburgh now. That's pretty far from Cleveland. He goes, "A little further." I said, "Not California, is it?" He goes, "Oh, no, it's not California." Turns out it's in Honolulu, Hawaii. And so I went out for 2 days to check it out and fell in love with it. And it was a great agency and a great job. I did that for 6 years, then went to the client side and became head of marketing for Bank of Hawaii. Meanwhile, my wife and she had a great job in a trust company. We had 2 boys born there in Honolulu. And now in my late 30s, it was a decision of, is this it? Do we stay? Is this the job I like? And there was some itch I needed to scratch. And it was getting an MBA.
Okay.
And so with my family situation and my career and living in paradise, it had to be worthwhile. So I rolled the dice and I got into Harvard Business School and got my MBA there, and it was fantastic, a wonderful pivot point for me. And then coming out of Harvard, I went to Citibank, VP of National Marketing in their consumer group, and then was recruited to MasterCard as Senior VP of Marketing for their global debit business. So now I had global experience. I elevated my marketing background, and all was good. But then they wanted me to reload to Westchester County from Chicago. My family had moved them around enough. We said, "This is it. We're going to stay in Chicago. Time to start a business." I knew it wouldn't be HVAC, that's for sure.
I was just going to ask you.
Right? But I looked within and said, what do I love to do? I love strategy and marketing, but I also love coaching and mentoring. I had become a admissions interviewer for Harvard Business School as an alum. Higher ed was so valuable and so huge to me that I took that experience and I said, I'm going to start an alternative MBA program for those that can't get in or can't afford to do the Harvard, Stanford, Wharton route.
Yeah.
So I started a business in the mid-90s called the MBA Exchange. I had Harvard materials. I had Harvard grads as instructors. I had everything except customers. I hit the wall early, and it was a wonderful lesson for me because the best ideas don't always turn out best. And so it was time for my first big pivot, and I realized that what people want is the real thing, and that their careers and academic backgrounds don't necessarily qualify them for admission to a top school. So I decided to pivot the business and become a career and advisory business. We work with 20-somethings to basically break down their life to that point and identify academic, professional, and personal changes and add-ons that could make them candidates for that kind of business school and a bigger job and a better job and maybe an entrepreneurial future. So that's what I did in 1996. And for 20 years, I grew that business, and that began my entrepreneurial journey.
I love it. I love it. I guess going back to your HVAC roots here, like, what do you feel like you took away from that experience, when you were young? Do you think that? Yeah.
A couple of things. One was a customer orientation. That story about picking up the phone on the second ring, that was embedded in me. The second was the gratification of a family business. My mom was the office manager. She was the admin for that. And it was a beautiful thing to see my parents collaborating and cooperating in most cases on business issues. And I thought that was really cool and added an element to my growing up that lasted with me. I also picked up the value of hard work. There was no putting off a task that was unpleasant, or, if it was important, you did it. And then I guess the last thing was that a business should be a moneymaker. And when we would come back from vacation, as we pull in the driveway, my dad would always say the same thing. He would say, "Boy, I'd hate to be my first customer on Monday." Because now he's going to pay for the vacation. So
exactly.
The motivation to deliver value and charge for it was also instilled and stayed with me, throughout my own journey.
Yeah, those are great. So in terms of the last business you spoke about, right, it sounds like 20 years you were running that one. Where did that go? How did it end up? Tell us a little bit about the journey there.
This was really a labor of love. I loved the business I did, 7-day weeks for 20 years.
Wow.
It was a global business, so there was no weekends and evenings were part of the business. And these were the early days of .com land. And so I learned a lot about technology by doing it. And that was exciting and fun. So with a laptop and an AOL address, for those that remember AOL, and a spare bedroom, literally, that's the way I started the MBA Exchange. So I loved it. From day one, it was a blast, helping people, doing good, doing well. The question any entrepreneur fears is that first customer asking you how many times you've done this and who you've done it for. Well, so I gave away the first few engagements. So I got my testimonials and, wrote an article for my fraternity magazine about why a top MBA and what it can mean to your life. And so within 6 months, I had traction and I was getting business, and it was wonderful. A couple of years into it, I wanted to scale it, maybe 2 years into it. And so, the dilemma of who can I trust? How do I vet them? How do I stop doing the things I love in order to grow the business? All these issues were things I was wrestling with. And I figured them out. I wasn't racing to do it. I wanted to take my time. The business was growing organically, which I loved. So as I would get more demand, I would add more supply. And in terms of supply, it was going out and finding people that had experience in career and academic advising. But they were doing it part-time. They were also business professionals that brought a pragmatic, set of experiences and credentials and networks to the engagement. I didn't want it just to be a pure theoretical or academic perspective, but something that's real world and actionable and tangible, because that's what I could do from my background. So over those 20 years, I built a team. We got up to 80 advisors, and they were great people. And I displaced or replaced the satisfaction and joy I got of dealing directly with clients by cultivating and training and trusting my colleagues. And so it kind of leveraged up and elevated the joy of the coaching and mentoring at I'll call it a wholesale level now, because now I was sharing my IP and my skills and my frameworks with people and trusting them and counting on them to add their own, secret sauce. And it worked beautifully. It really worked great. And that's how I scaled it. And then I started to add other businesses, other lines of business.
Okay.
I went to a pure career advisory business. I started a second brand in India because there was such demand from young Indian college graduates, but they didn't have the money to pay the, premium rate I was charging. And so I was able to lower the price point and add local India-based advisors without tarnishing or cannibalizing my brand. And I was very excited about that, going international with that. I added another business, which was one of the big long-term goals of our clients in their 20s and usually 20s was going into management consulting, McKinsey, Bain, BCG. This was the, classics. Nirvana, And so I started a business under the MBA Exchange, which was the Consulting Career Academy. Where I used 20 of my 80 consultants who had background with McKinsey, Bain, and BCG were now advising those young people that had that as their career path. And so that became a specialized subset of the business. So that's an example of how I scaled it in a way that made sense in the current time, but also would make it more saleable and more attractive down the road. Less founder dependence, less of a single service focus, more robust, and having more people, a broader management team that would be part of the acquisition, not just me or not just IP or a website. And that proved to be beneficial when I sold it in 2016.
Yeah. And I guess, when did you first decide or have an idea that you were going to sell this business? When did this first come up?
Good question. As the competition was increasing, as social media was becoming a more leveling the playing field more, pure expertise and reputation and, years of experience were being diluted by those who could get on social media faster, louder, and cheaper. And so it was distracting, frankly, from the essence of the business that I started. So it kind of planted the bee in my bonnet that, this isn't forever. It's a service business. And, if I don't start thinking about an exit, it will either be thrust upon me or the business will evaporate. And I always had the option of harvesting it. And I thought about that. Just keep raising the price, and eventually the market will go away, and it'll be a nice, profitable, aloha, and that ends. But as a marketer and a business person, I felt that I wanted the brand to continue. This was my baby. I started it from nothing. I wanted it to endure. I was very proud of it and passionate about it. And so I said, all right, I'm going to start to explore ways to go to market with the business. I was cautious. I obviously didn't want my competitors to know I was even thinking about selling, because they would sell against that. In other words, they point out that the MBA Exchange is, undergoing a change and maybe you should sign with us, right? So that was some risk. So I explored investment bankers and business brokers and found a local one in Chicago that said the right things and had a nice demeanor and seemed to have high integrity and had good recommendations. And so I approached them, and they were intrigued by the business and decided to work with them. And so that's the way I started. We took several months, and they developed a book on the business, plugging in all the numbers and projections, and they went to market for me with that. I also shared my network with them of people that I thought they should approach, And a few months later, they started to get some traction. Not a lot, but some. They probably came up with 4 potential suitors for this.
Okay.
I was encouraging them to look for strategic buyers because I knew that we had a lot of gravitas in the space we were in, but it would be complementary to other related businesses, academic advisors, tutoring services, test prep, and so on, that I thought that would be a good fit. And my belief was that a strategic buy can have a higher multiple because you're adding a complementary component that really helps grow the other business.
Yeah.
So that began. They started to introduce me to these potential buyers. And almost immediately, I reacted negatively to the conversation.
Okay.
They were becoming more financial than strategic. They weren't really respecting the brand. And I sensed they weren't in love with the business.
Yeah.
That might have been naive on my part, probably was. Maybe too personal, not professional enough, but it essentially turned me off from that kind of buyer. And so I told the banker, I said, let's take it off the market for now, give it a little breathing room. Maybe I'll change my point of view, but I'm going to sit on it for a while. I'm just not happy with that exit.
Yeah.
So sometimes things happen through serendipity. A few weeks later, one of my colleagues at the MBA Exchange, who had been a client originally, then a consultant, and then a full-time employee, approached me to buy the business.
Oh, interesting.
He thought he was going to surprise me, and he didn't. I said, I'm going to surprise you. Let's talk about it. So that began the conversations and the negotiation, which probably 8 months later or so led to the sale.
Interesting. How, I mean, I guess big takeaways on that process. I mean, you portrayed it here as a fairly logical and fairly straightforward and, kind of process. Where were the big hiccups, or like, where did you feel like you misstepped or, you kind of struggled?
Well, I would say one was finding advisors. And one of the benefits of getting a Harvard education was that I had a good network of fellow MBAs and alumni. And so that's what I ultimately did, was get an advisor who had bought and sold businesses and knew me and was, willing to do this pro bono as a friend.
Good.
And that helped. But getting his attention and his responsiveness was sometimes difficult. Sometimes I'd have a midnight quandary of some kind. And if I'd been paying an advisor, I probably would have been able to get him on a text or a call, but I needed to kind of wait in line a little bit. So that was a little frustrating. And then maybe the second was that my buyer had an advisor that he was paying. And so it became sort of 2-on-1 at some point. And I felt a little bit outnumbered. And I didn't have the luxury that my buyer had of pointing to an advisor and saying, well, I'd like to do this, but my advisor's telling me not to do it.
Classic.
Right? So I didn't have my alter ego that was giving me a little more leverage. What else did I learn from it? The LOI process, at first was not difficult. We each had our priorities. We each were flexible because we knew each other and were willing and able to, back off on certain things and push for other things. And so that process went okay. But after the LOI was done, a few weeks later, my prospective buyer wanted to renegotiate some of the points on the LOI. And I took that very personally and was not happy about that, and really was ready to walk away from the deal. And I would have. Fortunately, we reconciled and were able to move forward with the LOI. So the LOI is a beehive unto itself, as I learned. And, the word intent ought to be in air quotes because it's short of a commitment. I'd say that was another lesson learned. And maybe the last one would be even friendly due diligence can be exhausting in terms of numbers. This was not a huge business, and pulling out historical data that had really been kept on Excel spreadsheets was more cumbersome than I would have thought it would have been. On one hand, it made me happy I wasn't doing that with a financial buyer because it would have required a lot more, CPA expense and so on. But it was more time consuming than I thought it would be. I'd say that's really the takeaways from that.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about the structure of the deal? I mean, what component was kind of at close? What was deferred? What was seller financing? How did that work?
Sure. I'll talk in general terms just because of an NDA. But essentially, there was about 50% cash payment on the front end, and then a consulting fee for 2 years, in which I would be serving as chairman. And then there was the variable portion, which I financed as the seller, which had a payout period of, I'm thinking it was probably 5 years. And that was really basically the structure of the deal.
Yeah, so not a typical kind of process. And I'm always kind of curious with founders, post-transaction, like, what was your plan? Like, do you have big plans of what you're going to do next? Was this like, sell it and then I'll figure it out? Like, tell us a little bit about your mindset before, and how did actually things play out for you?
Sure. Well, I probably should have put a little more thought into what I'd be doing afterwards, but it came to me rather quickly. I had the leisure, the benefit, let's say, the luxury of being able to move off into the sunset over a 2-year period. So I was still involved in the business enough from an advisory standpoint to not go cold turkey on it. That helped a lot.
Yeah.
But my immediate replacement, let's call it, was to dust off the website that I had started 22 years earlier that was a marketing consulting firm, which I love doing, and I'm doing that now as well at Bauer and Associates. And so I was able to, tap my network and basically grow that practice. So I was doing marketing consulting for private equity-backed B2B businesses, focused mainly around branding, competitive analysis, etc. So intellectually, I was very engaged, and I enjoyed it, and it was revenue, and I felt, legitimate. My identity had been so much of having my own business that I really needed that. And fortunately, that worked.
Yeah.
It didn't quite satisfy the coaching, mentoring, entrepreneurial Jones that I still had. So I'm constantly sort of scoping out the marketplace to see what's not being done or what's not being done right, that I could, put a crowbar in there and make some space and dive in. So what I came to the conclusion of was that there are summer entrepreneurship camps for high school students that have brand names. Some of them run by Wharton, etc. Some are run by camping organizations, and some are run by, tech firms on the West Coast. But there was no summer entrepreneurship camp for high school kids that had both an academic pedigree and a pragmatic, practical, real world teaching component and networking and exercises, real world tangible exercises. So I decided that's what I was going to start. As an entrepreneur, one of my philosophies and beliefs is that if you can aggregate best of class partners to create something, it'll be faster, more scalable, more credible, and ultimately more valuable than building everything from scratch. So I knew that I needed a camp partner, a media partner for visibility and branding, and a curriculum partner. So thus began my journey in seeking alliances. At that point, I felt great about it because I was playing with house money. I had the answer. And if this worked, great. And if it didn't, that's okay too. But it did work. Now, not without its stops and starts. My first concept was to align with Shark Tank, ABC Shark Tank. Perfect media partner. They've got global visibility, a world-class brand, content, etc. So I approached them, and I spent the next 18 months trying to penetrate the bureaucracy of MGM and ABC. Ultimately, I walked away from it. Although the epitome of entrepreneurship, Shark Tank, their infrastructure and mindset is the exact opposite.
Yeah, exactly.
Lawyers and layers. And,
oh my gosh.
Right? So eventually I said, this is going nowhere.
Yeah.
And so I said, all right, who's my second best choice? Inc. magazine, the Bible of entrepreneurship. They got it instantly. and we've been working together since 2018. Great partner.
That's great.
I recruit from the Inc. 5000, of which I am an alum, and I bring in founders and mentors from the Inc. 5000 companies, and they love coming to the program and inspiring the students. And I had an academic partner and a good camp partner now called the National Student Leadership Conference, NSLC, and they're terrific. They do all the admin and the marketing and sales, and I get to be entrepreneur in residence, and I go to the campus or I work remotely and meet with the students, and I critique their business ideas before they head into their Shark Tank competition. And I get to bring in I bring in about 70 founders from Shark Tank. Interestingly, that's my revenge, so to speak, as I direct the founders without the bureaucracy. And I bring Harvard alums and post-exit founders, and they love coming and sharing their story with the students, and they become the judges of the pitch competition. So that's my summer engagement, and I love doing that. There's more.
Of course there is. You're an entrepreneur. I see the story all the time.
I'm serial. So I also do mentoring of startup founders.
Okay.
I do that on a few platforms, some early stage, some pre-exit. I enjoy that immensely. And I do some for fees, some for equity, and a few pro bono. And I find great satisfaction on doing that. Yeah. The last and most interesting, exciting adventure is the business that I've started most recently, which is called Post-Game Careers. This is the same career and education advisory that I did with the MBA Exchange, but it's focused solely on professional and NIL athletes. Those were the clients that I had over the 20 years that I enjoyed the most. And I kept to myself. I kept them, and I didn't share them with my colleagues because I really enjoyed the stories and I guess living vicariously with a pro athlete. So meanwhile, my younger son has extensive background in the sports business. He was the GM for NIL at Northwestern, and he's worked for the Bulls and the Bucks and the Chicago Fire soccer team. And so he became my advisor. And so I've now wedded, a couple of passions with the post-game careers business. And that's off and running. I'm working with wealth advisors who have athletes as their clients. And we've got about a half a dozen clients already, MLB players, NFL, NBA, and D1 athletes. And I'm having as much fun with that as I have with the 20-year run with the MBA Exchange.
I'm sure. I always say that entrepreneurs are both unemployable and never really retire. So you are the textbook example.
Absolutely.
I love it. So I'd love to hear a little bit, given all the experiences you've had and the businesses, that you've started and sold, what are some of the things that you see founders kind of get wrong early in the process of just kind of setting up a company that make it difficult later when they thinking about exiting or trying to do a management buyout or any kind of transaction there? What are some things that you've seen them not do well?
Well, the most basic, faux pas is the naming of the business. Two things. The obvious is those who name it after themselves. That is an instant anchor. Maybe it's kind of quaint and cozy, mom and popish, but in most businesses, that's going to be a constraint down the road. The other is naming the business too narrowly, focusing the name on the service or the product that they're currently promoting and building and selling without allowing growth room for adjacencies that aren't even, they're unknown maybe in the first 10 years. But it's an opportunity that almost every business has to, integrate and go after adjacent markets, add upsells and cross-sells, and specialize, and even launch other businesses. But if that name is too narrow, too literal, then that's a constraint. And renaming is not even an option after a certain point in a business. Too expensive, and you lose your momentum. So I'd say that's the second one. Another, this may seem like blasphemy too, but getting a partner too soon or at all. I've started and belonged to numerous entrepreneurship networks and forums, and I would say 8 times out of 10, those that have a partner blow up. It is arguably a tougher marriage than a real marriage. Finding that ideal partner who is complementary to you, but there's enough common ground, shared values, shared, expectations, it's really hard. And so I would really think several times before adding a partner, unless it is absolutely a skill set that you want to have in-house. And even then, it would not be a 50-50 partner. That's the kiss of death, in my view.
Yeah.
Secondly, maybe drawing on something I just said, which is feeling the need to build it and create it from scratch, as opposed to alliances. I believe alliances are untapped or underutilized avenue for an entrepreneur that can add, heft and credibility and channels very quickly. And a business that brings alliances with it, good, solid, time-tested, win-win alliances, is also a more saleable, more valuable business. So I would, urge entrepreneurs, and I do this with the folks I advise, is to look for alliances to the left and the right of you, and upstream and downstream, that you can tie in with. And then when you approach them, it's what you can do for them. That's got to be the mindset. Find their pain, ask about it, what's untapped, what's the bottleneck, and if you can address that, then you've got a conversation and a potential ally. If you ask what they can do for you, it's going to either scare away a good ally, or they'll fabricate it or exaggerate it in a way to get connected to you. So it's ask before you, it's offer before you ask, is my mantra for that.
Yeah, I like it.
Yeah, I'd say those are some good top of mind.
Those are good ones. Those are good ones. In terms of kind of preparing for exits, give me a sense of when a founder really needs to think about this. What are some of the early things they need to start doing? Like, I think this comes up a lot, right? Like, I've seen these companies that, they're in business 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years, and then they start thinking about it. And, what's the time frame that you suggest, and what are the first couple of steps?
Sure. Well, it's arbitrary, but I would say, 2 years out would not be too soon, because you want to go through a couple of sales cycles if your business is at all seasonal. Or, less than a straight line. You want to have evidence of a couple of cycles where you have been trying to maximize your revenue, minimize your expense, and gain market share and build margin. So knowing the end game is to exit, having 2 credible years, consecutive years, in which you can show evidence that your trajectory is up, and that you're stable and solid and growing, that's a good period of time. What else could I suggest? Tightening up on your financials. If you've been a little bit of a generalist, or not capturing your numbers with great detail and confidence, again, 2 years of books is a good number to have. I would say third would be thinking about your culture and your people. You don't want to spring this as a surprise. You want to do right by them. It's extremely important. And so if you've got this 2-year window, you can start to fill holes in your staffing that otherwise you might have endured for another year or so. You also might want to elevate some people into more senior management roles if they have that potential, because they're going to be critical. When you're leaving the business, it's those that you've trusted and are, at your side, that are going to be the management team that make the transition seamless and smooth and attractive to the buyer. So becoming sensitive and aware and strategic in how you're communicating with and developing your team is especially important if you've got an exit in mind in a couple of years. I'd say those are the ones that come to mind first.
Yeah, those are great. You mentioned this earlier, and I wanted to kind of dig into it now a little bit, is thinking about the types of sales and the types of buyers. I mean, you mentioned a financial versus strategic, and you had met with some. And give us a little bit more on how you kind of categorize the types of buyers or types of exits that a founder could have, and what the differences are for you.
Sure. So in terms of financial versus strategic, in some cases, a company simply wants more scale, more customers, more employees, a bigger footprint. Even if they are, in air quotes, strategically in your business, I still view them as a financial buyer because they're looking for scale. And so that's fine, and that can be a smooth exit, but you've got to be willing to give up your brand and maybe your culture and maybe some of your people if you go that route. And it's much more of a dollars and cents conversation and transaction.
Yeah.
And it's hard to speculate on what they're willing to pay for you because there's no, psychic aspect to acquiring your brand or your business. It doesn't light them up in the way that a strategic buyer who sees something in your business that is additive to the offerings or the people or the brand or the velocity of their current business. And so I in my case, I was drawn to that much more so in vetting and prioritizing potential buyers because, again, I wanted this brand to endure. The business was very personal for me. And somebody who would, carve it up, slice it up, and maybe eliminate it, I couldn't imagine that. There was too much blood, sweat, and tears and emotional investment in that. So again, if that's a constraint, if that seems superfluous or naive to a founder, more power to you if you can be a little more clinical than I was. But it worked out for me to stay true to my values and my priorities and still have that good exit. So I felt like I kind of had the best of both worlds with my exit, that it was strategic, but also almost familial in that it kept these important things alive for me. As far as the structure, it's kind of time horizon related, I would say. I looked what I was taking out of the business on an annual basis and realized that would be going away. And so I wanted to make sure that the cash portion of the transaction was enough to make up for that. In other words, I wouldn't have to be, sacrificing near-term cash flow because I've put out a longer time horizon on the deal. So I also wanted a significant cash component because, again, this was an individual, not a company. And so, things happen. And I wanted to make sure that if it blew up, that at least that cash portion was making it worthwhile for me to exit. Then I put a value on my time and my experience. And so if I was going to stay with the company in an advisory capacity, I wanted to be paid a market rate for that. And so that was the second component, was the advisory consulting portion. So I could sleep well at night knowing that in the worst case, I was, a consultant to the company being paid for my time and my value. And that would last the full 2 years that I was still involved. Then finally, the financing part, that was really a matter of sort of what the traffic will bear. In other words, a negotiated financing rate that was, I considered the market rate, I considered what the buyer's alternatives were for other financing, and I considered what I was willing to accept and still feel that I was getting value for what I was giving up. And so that's a negotiable number, and we came up, we found a number that worked, and so that's what we agreed to.
Those are great insights, great stories, some great takeaways there. I always say, you need to be very happy with the cash that you get at closing because everything else is at risk. And, I've seen a lot of founders struggle post-exit because, the terms or the money that's supposed to come in doesn't happen. And fortunately, it's not irregular.
Just like I was saying earlier about partners, another myth is that every earnout will turn out like thought it would, and it's not the case.
Dan, this has been a pleasure. We're going to hit time here. If people want to find out more about you, get to know you, ask questions, learn about what you're doing today, what's the best way to get that information?
Well, I'd say for the long story short, it would be my LinkedIn profile. I'm got about 6,000 followers now, and I'm always open to that. I love that. A second option would be my marketing consulting website, which is Bauer, Bauer -inc.com. Another one would be an organization I'm affiliated with now called exitwise.com, doing consulting for pre-exit founders. And that's exitwise.com. And then the last one, for those that want to learn about my pro athlete consulting business, that would be postgamecareers.com. So that's my endeavors, and that's me. And I'd welcome any inquiries or anybody just, kicking my tires.
Perfect. I'm going to show all the information in the show notes so people can get that.
Sorry, one more I don't want to forget. Entrepreneurship camp, the summer entrepreneurship camp for those with teens of their own, nieces, nephews, neighbors, etc. It's a wonderful camp. It's underway now, but we do it every summer. And that long URL is NSLC Leaders, Nancy, Sam, Lima, Charles, NSLCleaders.org/Inc Business, INCBUSINESS. So that's I've got nothing else.
Perfect. Well, we'll get those in there too. Dan, thanks so much for taking the time today. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Bruce.